by Chasing the Rainbows with your host, Bernice Quisenberry.
This week's podcast episode is called Mindful of Clutter, and it's all about the third phase of grief, which is disorganization and despair. The previous two episodes were the first phase, talking about shock and numbness. The last one was the second phase, searching and yearning. And then a following episode coming up here will be the fourth phase, which is reorganization and recovery. Just as a reminder, grief is an extremely personal experience, and our goal here is to let fellow survivors out there know that you are not alone. However you are feeling or whatever you are going through, we are here for you. That's why we are sharing our own personal experiences in hopes that you find a connection here. We are trying to create a safe, open dialogue space for all survivors. I'm flying solo again this week. I'm talking about this third phase, so please bear with me. Searching and yearning, once this actually started to give way a little bit and I started to transition into this next phase, I all of a sudden was smacked in the face by our new reality that we were faced with. And I was confronted with the fact that nothing will ever be the same. Our life that we envisioned will never be the same. Our dreams, our future will never be the same. Also, I will never be the same person. And it really started to hit me in this phase. And then trying to figure out who I was. There was a new sense, too, for me that I was experiencing where I felt like life was extremely unfair and the cards that we were dealt. I also felt like, I lost this sense of positivity and enthusiasm about life in this phase. And now I understand the reality and things that can go wrong and also tragedy almost. And it's not that I haven't experienced this in other areas of my life, but not to this extent, not with an own child of mine like this before, because this was a lot worse than anything else I've experienced. And it made me feel almost like I was that wounded, vulnerable bird out in public in front of, my predators and prey and things like that. And that's just really how I felt. Like everybody could just see the hole that was through my soul. And it just left me, being this person that I didn't know who I was, almost like a shell of a person. I also finally truly accepted reality of our new life after loss in this phase. That was everything that had changed. Like I said, would never go back to the way it was or the way that we imagined. These words, disorganization and disorientation that are used to explain this makes daily living to be very hard and felt like it was always like an uphill battle to get out of bed, to shower, to get ready for work, to go grocery shopping. Really to do anything, it felt grueling. And I had a lot of ups and downs in this phase. And I also felt like I would go in 5 different directions, 100 miles per hour. And I'll get into kind of what I felt like with that in a little more detail then. But I just could not keep my mind off of thinking about like how sad and like depressed I felt. I found myself also really pulling back and withdrawing from others, and also not really being able to enjoy things in life anymore. And I mean, I felt that from the beginning, joy kind of diminished when we lost Brooke. But like I said, I accepted the reality of our new life, but my feelings that really increased and the ones that, like I said, were going 100 different miles in different directions per hour was feelings of apathy, anger, despair, hopelessness. But the worst one for me was questioning every little thing. And I know I spoke about that a little bit during the searching and yearning because questions arose around, the loss, around our pregnancy, around previous health conditions, all of those things. But these questions that I had were more around, our future. What did that hold? Also, what our new reality is and who I was, as in, what do I even like to do? What foods do I even enjoy eating? How do I even view the future anymore? How do I view death? How do I view anything? Like the things that I used to take so much pleasure in doing or the hobbies that I used to have, no longer there, had no interest in them whatsoever. And it was just really weird to be in this spot where, well, I guess I shouldn't say weird. It was more confusing, and it just made me feel even more distant from everything else in life at this phase. And like I said, I could not also find compassion and empathy towards others people's problems in our lives. So when somebody else would call me, or a coworker, or I was talking with someone and they would start to explain about a bad day they were having or something that came up or an issue in life, unless it was death related, where that is the final goodbye, I felt like, are these even really problems? Like I honestly had a hard time wrapping my head around someone else's issues. Like, this is nothing serious compared to what I was going through and what was in my own head. And I know that sounds extremely selfish, but it's so hard during this time to take anything else that isn't as final, isn't something as traumatic as an unexpected loss, to take anything else seriously. And I know it's even now admitting it and saying it out loud, I feel ridiculous about it, but it's the truth. That's just where I was at. And also, like, another direction I was going in was anger. And I was never really an angry person. It took a lot because I was such a positive person all the time, always wanted to be optimistic, find, the silver lining in things, until we lost Brooke and realized that that's not always the case in life. And that's okay. And this was one of those occurrences, because I was never going to find the positive nature in this. I was never going to find the silver lining in this, because there is none. And I'm never going to find a reason to why this happened, because there isn't any. And so, I had so much anger towards the medical team, towards the hospital, towards what cards we were dealt in life, and thinking about and questioning. And I know I mentioned this before, our higher power, whatever we believed in, whatever that case is. It was just, I just felt so uncertain, on edge about every little thing. And the anger that came with it, I completely understand now why there are smash rooms out there. I can understand why people need to yell into a pillow, all of those things, because I found myself there. Like, I needed to scream into a pillow just to get out some of that anger, because what else am I going to do? During this time too, I looked into different grief practices that people have during mourning. What are other cultures doing? And what I find interesting is the cultures that hold ceremonies for days, weeks on end around losing loved ones, where they're dancing around a fire, screaming, yelling, taking, a stick or a bat to the ground, shaving their heads. Like, it all made sense. Like, it finally hit me that I've gone through such a horrific grief that, like, I get why people do these things now, like why cultures do this. And it's not that I've never experienced a significant loss in my life, like my grandparents or close loved ones, but this was completely different because it was unexpected, tragic, and parents outlive their children. When that does not happen, everything is completely uprooted at that point. And I think for me, that is where I found a lot of the anger and pent up frustration with our whole entire situation. So, it was like, where do I place this blame? Where do I place this anger? And that's really where I was finding comfort in doing so. But I also felt like we were never going to come up from air from this, right? I was heading in all these different directions with all these different emotions and feelings at any given moment. And I felt like I was never going to genuinely smile again. I was never genuinely going to have a deep belly laugh or find something enjoyable in life again during this phase. And I struggled with knowing what our future held, what tragedy was going to come next, because I felt like now at this point, since we were able to see an unexpected tragedy, that it easily could happen again, right? And who else in our life was going to die? I thought about at this time, we just couldn't handle too much more or handle the loss. And unfortunately, we did have a few losses in the same year as our daughter, and it did hit our family very hard. I also questioned relationships and people's motives. I was the type of person that before our losses, I would reach out to friends, loved ones, check in with them, like doing daily check ins, seeing how they're doing, picking up the phone, just making random phone calls and things like that. And then after our loss, I was like, well, if people want to stay in touch with me, they'll reach out to me, they'll do it this way. And I came to realize how many people were truly there for me versus me being there for them, right? All the time, because I was at the point where I needed that support and I didn't know how to ask for it. So, ones that did step up and do things like do dinner drop-offs, coordinate all of that. Like it was beautiful to see that, but then it was also heartbreaking to see those that weren't truly there like I thought that they were, or relationships that I thought were deeper than they really were. Because, like I said, I had a hard time also trusting anyone or anything, um, you know, with that we had in our future. And also during this time, I think I came to realize how precious time really is and how am I going to spend it. So I didn't want to, and this is going to sound awful too, waste my time on people that weren't there for us when, I was there for them during different times in their lives. Also, I didn't want to do things that I didn't find joy in, oh, well, I wasn't finding joy in anything these days, but I wasn't going to do activities or go places that I wasn't getting anything out of them. And that's really where I was at with it. And I felt like I also didn't need to owe anybody an explanation because of where we were at. And honestly, the ones that truly loved me and understood and were doing check-ins and being open-minded and were there as a safe space for me knew that. And they completely respected and understood where we were at, never felt us, put pressure on us, never made us feel any certain way. And we always knew that we had their love and support behind us. I think one of the biggest things that I was questioning, well, I should say two things, was my marriage at this point and our home that we purchased just a few months before our daughter was born. And, those two things were constant reminders for me about our loss. So with my husband, I was placing blame in a lot of places. And I feel bad because he got the blunt of a lot of what I was going through. I, would open up to him, but then I would also shut down at certain points too. And then he would get, me on my bad days, but also, on ones that were okay as well. But during this phase with all of the different emotions and the roller coaster of them all and all heading in different directions all at once, it was a lot for anybody to take on. And so, it was causing issues in our marriage. And, looking back, there's nothing I could have done to handle it differently because it was just how my mind and my body was experiencing it, unfortunately. And I also wasn't at a point where I felt like I could control or sugarcoat my feelings, or like how I like to say is church them up to make others feel comfortable. And in my own home, I was not going to do so because this is like my safe space here. But also, I struggled with our house because, like I said, we bought it a couple of months in intentions with bringing home our baby. And that's why we decided to buy this house was, based on all of that and expanding our family. And so her nursery was a constant reminder of that pain. I actually had to keep the door closed for several months and not go in there because, I was spending a lot of time during the shock and numbness and also the searching and yearning. But then during this phase, had to completely shut the door and not even go in. I could not really be reminded of anything that, came along with that. And it started then for me to like set up these resentments about our house. Like any little thing that would go wrong, then I'm like, oh, see, we shouldn't have bought this house. Like all of a sudden we were having issues with our air conditioning unit. And I was like, oh, see, I told you right before we bought this house that this air conditioning unit was going to be a problem. And here we are replacing it. Also, we had some issues in our kitchen from a remodel that they did before we bought it. And it was like, oh, see, this wasn't done properly. This is why we shouldn't have bought it. And it was just things like that. But realistically, this was a beautiful home and we are blessed to have it. It was just everything at that point I questioned and just, it was all up in the air at this point. I also question though, like what was I doing with my life? So, majority of our days are spent, from our age of, in our 20s until our, in our 60s with working. and in our professional careers. And I really questioned, what was I doing? Is this even something I enjoy anymore? Or is this something, is this just something I'm doing to get a paycheck? And why would I only live life to get a paycheck? Why would I not do something that I don't thoroughly enjoy or you know, find happiness in? Because life is too short. So why do anything less than that? And so I was really having a hard time with balancing, being able to provide for our family, but then also doing something we enjoy. So I was like going back and forth with this a lot, and finding where I was. But the thing was, I had no mental capabilities or space to be able to sit there and logically think through this during this phase. So it was almost like I just kept beating a dead horse in my head with all of these different thoughts and all of these different feelings circling around. But I also felt like I was going out of my way to keep finding fun events, public events for our family to be going to. And this was to escape everything that I was thinking and feeling during this phase, because the reality of it all was just way too painful. And I did not want to continue to sit in it. I mean, I did a lot late at nights and cry myself to sleep and then wake up, early mornings or in the middle of the night and completely just start feeling all these feelings rushing in all over again. And it was really difficult. So I felt like during the day, if we could find things, like we got season passes to an amusement park. I was taking day trips with my son to do different things along with, my husband would also come along. But I was trying to just live in the moment and with all the clutter in my head. So the acceptance of the truth that our daughter died and is not with us, creating these memories, that she's not going to be here with us physically and is no longer in our lives, just ate at me. I found myself too, and this was not pointed out to me, but this was pointed out by my trauma therapist, that I had complicated grief and it started to become apparent in this phase. And I had to let go of what was giving me so much comfort up until this point, which was my weighted bear. And there's a reasoning behind it, right? I realized after several months of carrying around the weighted bear, even though it was helping with my aching arms, like a lot of us parents, survivors feel after, we lose our babies. But the weighted bear was the weight of Brooke when she passed. So when you think about it, I was stuck on the day of the actual events and the day that she passed, and I was not moving forward, as in I was still stuck on that and not finding, for example, Brooke would have been growing by now if she was alive. So that weighted bear would have weighed more, and she would have continued to grow. But I couldn't see past that or anything else. And so I needed to, put down the weighted bear, which was very difficult for me to do because I felt so much comfort in it, but it was also, the thing that was holding me back from, some healing and things like that. And I almost was using it as a crutch to go out in public or to do anything. And so also we were realizing too, I was keeping like around her death going on in our house. Like everything around her death was what was lingering there. For example, we had funeral flowers from her service, and all of them were dead by now and in vases, and I left them in there. And I had them all around the house for months because I didn't know what to do with them. I didn't want to make those decisions. I had a really hard time processing, and honestly, my husband was allowing me the opportunity to figure out what I wanted to do. And so I realized, and this is all through, working with a really good trauma therapist, that I needed to put those flowers when they were dried either in a bag and then get rid of all the vases, because we had about 10 to 15 of them through our house, and only keep some of the flowers, and others I needed to throw out because it was all around symbolicism of her death. And so we needed to start bringing in life into the house, or at least I did, because I felt like, okay, this would challenge me then to start to understand that life is going to move forward, even if I'm not ready to, but it will challenge me to understand that and to also bring in, because life, even though it can be filled with tragedy, and we know this now as survivors, there's also, some beauty. And I think that's really hard and was hard for me to see in this phase. So if not, I can fake it till I make it, And if it is bringing in real flowers and filling our house with that, bringing in fresh fruit to have fresh fruit baskets of lemons and limes. If it's, getting a new pet, because then we decided to bring in a puppy, and that honestly seemed to help. And we were already looking at a second dog anyways, previous to all of this, because we had English Springer Spaniels and they do really well with companions. So we were looking at that anyways. And that was something that we chose to do during that time as well. And so also having a puppy made me put down my weighted bear because she was gonna chew it, because she chewed everything. So it also helped with that as well. And I got to hold a puppy in my arms instead of a weighted bear. And then I got to see the growth of the puppy, which was wonderful. And couldn't have came at a better time, I felt like, during all of this. I also learned in this phase, and I had to work through this, the importance of grounding, of breath techniques, and meditation. I have never been one that could sit there quietly, think about nothing, and meditate. And I have tried numerous times because I know and have seen how impactful it can be on others' lives. So I actually had to do what worked best for me. The grounding techniques, understanding, like focusing on where my feet are planted, wiggling my toes in those moments where I felt like I was going to have a panic attack and my anxiety was really getting out of control. Almost, especially when I was out in public or in a work setting, focusing on those things, like feeling the insides of my socks or my open toe shoes or whatever I was wearing, but also understanding, okay, this is where it's at, and it would help me in certain situations. The breathing techniques was interesting too. That for me, there was like something called dragon breath and ocean breath, and those two worked great for me. In a sense that it allowed me to sit there and focus on something and focus on my breath, taking it in and out, and the way I would release it. But especially doing either one of those during different times. Like one I used, when I was having those like panic episodes, and then the other one I would use during a more like, okay, I could feel it coming on kind of thing, or like before I would feel like when I saw anger coming on and those kind of things. And just being in public and just doing it, in and out, like practicing those techniques was wonderful. But the meditation, so like I mentioned, I could not do the traditional sense of it where you sit and do it. Even if I guided meditation, I know you can find a bunch of videos on YouTube. There's a lot of people out there that do it, but I could not get myself to do it. So how I found my form of meditation, and this is also an activity that I did previous to Brooke passing, and I found comfort and still enjoyment in it, was running for me. And so I found that was really my form of meditation. It was my time to escape. It's me in the open road, pounding the pavement, and just really focusing on one step in front of the other. And that was for me how I really processed things was through that. And doing it a couple times a week after I was able to, from healing, from our C-section. But this phase though also allowed me to start to process different things that we needed to, or decisions that we needed to make. And one of them being, something that really wasn't talked about with me at all, or, I didn't have the opportunity to talk to other survivors about, was my breast milk supply. So what's really hard is pumping. I was pumping for Brooke when she was in the NICU, and then also you just can't cut it off cold turkey because you worry about infections and things like that. So I had a really decent supply build up in those 5.5 weeks that she was here, and then after. So unless you start testing with test strips, you can't donate your breast milk, which I had no idea that was a thing, or the around looking at doing that and things like that. Like I didn't look into it until I already had the supply in a freezer, and it was a lot. And so I didn't know what to do with it. So it, after a couple months, it goes bad in the freezer. So it was during this phase when it was out of date then at that point. And then what do we do with it? And I had so much guilt around it, and just like, why didn't I know that? If I looked up a donation place, and that if I would have been swabbing or testing the breast milk with test strips, each time, that this could have been donated, and I just, throwing it out just made me feel like, this could have been nutrients for another baby. But unfortunately, since we didn't know any of this or the procedures around it, we had to get rid of it. So it was just a lot around this time. And those emotions added on top of everything else that we were already going through was just so extremely difficult. So what ended up happening was, my husband had to handle it for me, and thank goodness he did, because I don't think that it's something that I could have done. And there's not even like, there's any use for the breast milk once it's expired. But to me, it was just another way that we were letting go of Brooke and facing our reality in and of itself. And the reality was painful. I mean, every part of this phase was extremely painful for me. And I just could not find comfort in anything that I was seeking during this phase. And I had to feel it and go through it and allow myself to process it the way I needed to be able to move forward. Not that I'm ever going to move on, because I don't feel like that, but, growing bigger and larger than the grief that I was experiencing. I felt like at this phase that was never going to happen. And I did not want to be that negative Debbie Downer or whatever that, person. And I felt like that is who I was becoming, and that's who I was gonna be for the rest of my life in this phase. And I had no energy or power or control to do anything else than to just allow myself to go through everything that I was feeling. And I think the best thing for me was just understanding time takes time. And I believe it was really good that I was in talk trauma therapy for this reason, because at that time, I couldn't recognize things in myself that others could recognize in me. And it took a professional to do so, especially in a traumatic loss like what we went through with our daughter. And so for me, I'm forever grateful for that, because, like I said, hindsight now, I can see exactly why and the things that I was feeling and how I got there, and all of it. But when you're living in that, that is your reality. And I could not see past it. And I am just grateful that eventually I did. And it was through the help of others. And it was also through the help of other survivors, ones that today are still in my life, that are still involved in our Chasing the Rainbows nonprofit, and ones that, have been tremendously just selfless and there for me when I couldn't be there for myself. And that showed up for me. And for that, I'm forever grateful. This concludes our third phase of grief episode. For the survivors out there tuning in, please visit criedoutloudpodcast.com if you would like to write in for a maternal fetal medicine segment, or if you want to write in about any questions about our support services that we have. Also, you can visit chasingtherainbows.org. Chasing the Rainbows is our 501c3 nonprofit that is all around doing daily free support services for survivors. We have daily peer-to-peer support groups, mentorships, and other resources for you. With that said, survivors, please follow and tune in weekly on Wednesdays as we drop each episode. We are always with you, fertility loss, pregnancy loss, and baby loss survivors.